They say family reunions bring people together, but all mine ever did was take me apart. It was the kind of sticky July afternoon that clung to your skin and made everything feel heavier than it should. Aunt Maxine was fanning herself with a paper plate, and the kids were already coated in popsicle juice and bug spray. I had been up since sunrise helping Mom haul folding tables from the garage and wipe down the lawn chairs we only used once a year. This year, the Campbell family reunion was at a community park just outside Little Rock, convenient enough for everyone to show, but far enough from home that no one could sneak out early. My job, as usual, wasn't listed on the printed itinerary taped to the water cooler, but everyone knew I'd be filling the gaps. Picking up spilled drinks, calming the baby when Lisa needed a moment, untangling the speaker wires for Uncle Barry's impromptu karaoke set. That was me. Iris, the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything. Dylan showed up fashionably late, of course, in his usual linen button-up and 2 white sneakers. He swept in with handshakes and back pats, dropping a six-pack on the drink table like it was a royal offering. He had a way of making everything about him feel like a performance, and he always made sure I was in the audience. "So, Iris," he called across the table as I was passing out grilled corn, "still playing housemaid for the family, huh?" I forced a smile. "Still auditioning for a family favorite?" He laughed loud enough for everyone within 10 feet to look over. "Oh, come on," he said. "Don't act like you don't know. I mean, should I say it? Or does everyone already know?" I paused, corn in hand, as a hush started to gather under the canopy of the rented event tent. Dylan took a swig of beer and smirked. "She's adopted." It landed like a dropped casserole dish on concrete. A few people chuckled nervously, expecting a punchline. When none came, they just looked at me. And then, to my horror, at Mom. She didn't say anything. She didn't flinch or laugh or even scold Dylan like she would have if one of the kids had spilled soda on the cake. She just looked down, busying herself with refilling the potato salad tray. "Wait, seriously?" someone whispered behind me. I felt the air drain from the tent. Everything slowed. I turned to Dylan, but his grin said everything I needed to know. I looked back at Mom, willing her to speak, to laugh and wave it off like one of Dylan's usual stunts. But she didn't. She didn't even look at me. The paper plate in my hand sagged with the weight of the corn. My throat burned. I turned without a word and walked toward the edge of the park. Sophie, my cousin's daughter, followed a few steps behind, calling out softly, "Iris?" I waved her off, not unkindly, but firmly. There was a picnic table near the edge of the woods, where the light broke through just enough to make everything seem golden. I sat there, trying to breathe. Later, when most of the crowd had returned to their food and chatter, Mom came over holding a can of Sprite. "I didn't mean for it to come out like that," she said quietly. "I didn't drink." "But it's true," she didn't answer right away. "I thought you knew. I thought we didn't have to say it out loud." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or scream or disappear into the dirt. "You let him say it like that. You let him humiliate me." Mom shrugged, eyes glassy. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose you." "You lost me the second you stayed silent," I said, then stood and walked away. I drove home alone, windows down, hair whipping across my face. The sunset was a smear of orange and pink, but I didn't notice. I was too busy replaying every interaction I'd ever had with my family, every time someone said I didn't look like them, or called me the quiet one, or joked that I must have been swapped at the hospital. I used to laugh with them. I didn't think it mattered. Apparently I was wrong. That night I stood in my bedroom, suitcase open on the bed, hands moving before my mind could catch up. A stack of jeans, a couple of t-shirts, my camera, my charger. I stared at the family photo on my dresser, last year's reunion, where I stood off to the side, cropped slightly by the frame. I didn't cry, not really. Just sat there with this strange hollow ache where something solid used to be. I packed a small bag that night, not just of clothes, but of every moment I realized I didn't belong. The thing about leaving quietly is no one realizes you're gone until they need something from you. I left before sunrise. No note, no text, no dramatic goodbye, just the click of the front door behind me, soft enough not to wake anyone, even though I doubted anyone would have noticed. My car, old, dependable, and always half full of moving boxes, was already loaded with my duffel and camera bag. I'd booked a one-way bus ticket the night before to a place I remembered only from a road trip years ago, Florence, Oregon, a coastal town with enough gray skies to match my mood and enough distance to make a clean break. The terminal was quiet except for the sound of vending machines buzzing and an old man coughing somewhere near Gate 3. I bought a black coffee that tasted like cardboard and sat near the back of the station, my bag hugged to my chest. The bus arrived just as the first blush of morning touched the horizon. I didn't look back when I boarded. Maybe I should have, just to confirm there was nothing worth missing. The ride stretched long and slow, interstate signs flickering past, rest stops with too bright lighting, families with noisy kids, and couples whispering into shared earbuds. I watched trees blur into mountains, then flatten into plains again. My head throbbed with the kind of ache you get when your body moves before your soul can catch up. Somewhere in the middle of Idaho, I thought about Dylan's face when he said it, like he was throwing a dart he knew would stick. I thought about Mom's silence, about all the birthdays and school concerts and "we're so proud of you" moments, and how suddenly they felt like props in a show I wasn't even cast in. I got into Florence just past noon the next day. The air was cool and smelled like salt and pine, the kind of town where mailboxes still stood on wooden posts and neighbors waved whether they knew you or not. I walked from the depot toward the main strip, dragging my bag behind me like a tail I hadn't yet decided to lose. That's when I saw the sign, "Room for rent, inquire upstairs." The building was old but sturdy, the kind with green trim and a porch swing out front. I climbed the creaky steps and knocked on the door labeled 2A. She opened the door with a cat in her arms and suspicion in her eyes. "You're not selling anything, are you?" she asked. "No, ma'am, just saw the sign." She looked me over, long hair pulled back in a loose braid, worn boots, hoodie with a faded college logo. The cat jumped down and disappeared around the corner. "You look like someone who's been told too much and believed it all," she said. I didn't answer. She opened the door wider. "I'm Evelyn Price, 73 widow, don't like strong perfumes or loud shoes. Rent's $400 a month, cash only, no parties. Room's upstairs, do you want it or not?" I blinked, then nodded. "I can pay for the first month now." We walked up together. The stairs creaked with every step. The room had sloped ceilings, a small window that faced the alley, and a bed that looked like it had hosted 1,000 different stories. A tiny sink sat in the corner beneath a mirror that had lost its silvering at the edges. "It's not much," she said, brushing dust off the windowsill. "But it's quiet. That's exactly what I need." "Then it's yours," she replied. "One more thing. You gotta help me with groceries on Fridays, and with Tucker, the cat. He's old and picky." "I can do that." She handed me a spare key. It was warm from her palm, heavy in a way that surprised me. We didn't talk much. She showed me where the towels were, pointed out which cabinet creaked too loud, and then left me alone. I sat on the twin bed that night listening to seagulls, thinking, I may not know where I came from, but maybe I can choose where I belong. I didn't come here to be seen, but somehow Evelyn saw right through me. Most mornings in Florence started with fog so thick it seemed to blur the edges of everything, the kind of mist that gives you permission to move slower, speak softer, stay hidden. I liked it. It matched the quiet part of me that didn't want to explain where I came from or why I was here. Evelyn never asked. She just handed me a grocery list every Friday, written in blocky cursive on a yellow notepad, and gave me cash folded once inside a used envelope. Tucker, her cat, had taken to sleeping outside my door like a cranky doorman, and I didn't mind. I spent most days walking around the town. There wasn't much to it: one main street, a few antique shops, a diner, and a small bookstore that smelled like dust and cinnamon. But there was a steadiness to it all, like the town itself was holding its breath and letting it out real slow. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I had to rush or perform. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch stairs peeling a clementine when Mr. Lopez from 2B came shuffling up the walk. He was in his 60s, retired longshoreman, always wore flannel, even in July. "Have you seen this?" he said, holding out a folded paper. It was a city notice, official seal, bold print. I scanned it. Code violation, property at risk of review, potential eviction pending inspection. Where did you get this? It was in the mailbox. Top one's Evelyn's, right? My stomach tightened. I thanked him and knocked on Evelyn's door. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her expression told me she already knew. I saw it this morning, she said. Don't worry about it. What kind of violation? She waved a hand. Just paperwork nonsense. I've lived here 30 years, Iris. The city loves making us fill out forms so they feel useful. Can I look at them? I said, don't worry. Her tone was sharp, but her eyes were tired. Later that night, I heard her shuffling through papers in the kitchen, the sound of drawers opening and closing, the crinkle of envelopes. Something inside me itched, not just worry, but the old reflex, the one I used to have at home when I saw bills go unpaid or Mom forget to file for school forms. The need to step in, so I knocked. She opened the door and handed me a stack without a word. There were tax records, property assessments, renewal forms with missing fields, unsigned boxes, and a letter from the city giving her 15 days to comply before initiating proceedings. This is more than paperwork, I said. You could lose the building. She sat down at the kitchen table, rubbing her temple. I thought I filed the exemption, she muttered. Harold always handled that stuff. After he passed, I guess I forgot. Then we fix it now. Iris, I'm not doing this out of pity, I said, sitting across from her. It's just kindness. We worked through the pile for the next 2 hours. I filled out the missing sections, double-checked the property ID, and found the exemption form buried behind a gardening catalog. You just need to sign here, I said, handing her a pen. She hesitated, then signed with a hand that trembled just a little. When we were done, she leaned back and let out a sigh so deep I felt it in my own chest. You did more for me in a week than my own son in 5 years, she said. I looked down at the papers. He probably didn't know what to look for. She scoffed. He knew. He just didn't look. The next morning, I sealed the envelope, stamped it, and walked it down to the blue mailbox near the bookstore. The wind smelled like salt and eucalyptus. For a second I stood there, envelope in hand, wondering whether to write a return address. Instead, I pulled a scrap of notebook paper from my pocket and wrote, This property is not just bricks and beams. It's a home, and she's a keeper of light. I slipped it inside and pressed the envelope shut. I mailed the form with a note, unsigned, no return address. Let them think it was an angel, not a stranger. They said I didn't belong, but in this town, every small kindness planted roots. September crept in quietly, like a cat slipping through an open window. The fog still came in the mornings, but it lifted sooner now, giving way to skies the color of worn denim and sun that touched your skin like memory. The tourists were gone, and Florence settled into its local rhythm, slow, steady, unbothered. I found a rhythm too. Evelyn's place began to feel less like someone else's attic and more like somewhere I could breathe. I started picking up shifts at the Patterson's Bookstore Cafe just off Bay Street, a cozy little place where the coffee came in hand-thrown mugs and the register still had a drawer that dinged when it opened. I worked the morning hours, which suited me fine. Fewer customers, more quiet. The Pattersons were kind in that old-fashioned, understated way. Mr. Patterson always called me Miss, even though I was 34, and his wife slipped extra scones into my bag at the end of every shift. It was there I met Alec. He came in around 10 most mornings, always ordered drip coffee, black, and brought a copy of the Florence Gazette under one arm. I noticed the camera bag slung across his shoulder first, weathered leather, fraying at the edges. He didn't talk much at first, just nodded, paid in cash, and took the corner table near the window. One Tuesday, he lingered at the counter. You're not from here, he said. I looked up from wiping the espresso machine. That obvious? Just enough, he said, and smiled. But you fit somehow. That was the thing about Florence. No one asked too much, but when they did, it never felt like a test. One afternoon, Mrs. Patterson caught me sketching on a napkin during a lull. You should submit something to the Fall Arts Gathering, she said, eyeing my rough pencil lines of the harbor cranes. Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be yours. I laughed, half embarrassed. I'm not an artist. Art's just noticing what most people skip, she said, handing me another napkin. That night, I pulled out my camera. It wasn't fancy, just something I picked up secondhand before leaving Arkansas, but it still worked. I started taking it with me on walks, the docks, the rusted mailbox at the corner of 3rd, Evelyn's porch in the morning when the light hit just right. There was one photo I kept coming back to, a shot of her cat Tucker stretched across the worn wooden steps, sunlight filtering through the hydrangea leaves above him. It wasn't technically perfect, but something about it felt honest. Evelyn caught me editing it one evening at the kitchen table. "You always carry that thing," she said, nodding to the camera. "Helps me see clearer," I replied. She studied the screen for a moment. "That one's good. The cat looks smug. He thinks he owns the place. Well, maybe he does." I didn't tell her I was thinking of submitting it. I just did, attached as a short note. "Where kindness lives, everything blooms." Alex saw me with the camera later that week. He said, "Didn't peg you for someone who noticed light the way you do." "Didn't peg you for someone who talks much," I replied. He chuckled. "Touché." The application deadline passed. I didn't tell anyone, didn't want to make it a thing, but I found myself checking my email more than usual. Refresh, scroll, nothing. Until one night, just as I was about to shut the laptop, the subject line appeared, "Florence Arts Gathering Submission Status." I opened it with a breath held longer than I realized. That night, an email popped up from the festival board. Accepted. Display date, October 7th. I hadn't heard from them since the reunion, so when Dylan called, I knew it wasn't for me. It was for something they needed. The call came while I was sorting through prints at the kitchen table. I'd spent the morning choosing which shots to make for the arts gathering, laying them out on craft paper in the soft light that spilled through Evelyn's kitchen window. Tucker sat nearby on the windowsill, tail twitching in quiet judgment. The ringtone buzzed against the table. I glanced at the screen. Dylan Campbell. I didn't answer right away, just stared at the name, as if it might disappear if I ignored it hard enough. But it didn't. It rang again, and again. I finally picked up. "Iris," he said, "you've been ignoring everyone." I didn't answer. "Listen, Mom's been not well. She had a scare last week. Chest pain. Hospital did tests. They think it's stress." His voice carried that manufactured concern I remembered well, smooth enough to sound polished, sharp enough to cut if I wasn't careful. "I thought you should know." I kept my tone even. "Thank you for calling." There was a pause. "Are you going to come back?" I waited for a beat. "Why?" "Because it's family, Iris. Because when someone's in trouble, we show up." I almost laughed. I wanted to ask where that sentiment was when I stood humiliated in front of 3 dozen relatives, or when Mom turned away instead of speaking up. But I didn't. I just breathed in slowly. "I hope she gets better," I said. "But I'm not coming back." "Don't be like this," he snapped. "She's your mother. She's the one who stayed silent." Another long pause, then, softer. "People make mistakes. So do I, and I'm making one now. I'm staying gone." He didn't say goodbye, just hung up. The silence after was thick. Evelyn stepped in from the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Someone you used to owe something to?" she asked. "Used to think I did," I said, still staring at the phone. She walked to the table, picked up one of the prints, a shot of the harbor just after rain, glistening, empty, peaceful. "Don't confuse noise for meaning," she said. "Some people yell when they feel small." That night, Mom called. I didn't answer. The next day, she called again. I picked it up. Her voice was tired, softer than I remembered. "Iris," she said, "I don't want to fight." "Then don't," I replied. "I'm sorry for how it all happened." "Are you sorry it happened or sorry I walked away?" She hesitated. "I was scared. I didn't want you to think I loved you less." "You didn't have to say it. You showed it." "I didn't know how to fix it." "You don't." We sat in silence for a while, then she asked, "So where are you now?" "I'm somewhere quiet." "I miss you." I nodded even though she couldn't see. "I know." We didn't say more. After the call, I went back to the prints. My fingers lingered on one of Evelyn's porch, Tucker napping in the afternoon light, a basket of fresh laundry in the corner. That one felt like home. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want an apology carved from guilt. I just wanted to keep what I'd built. Later that week, I walked down to the post office and bought 2 manila envelopes. Inside each, I placed a printed ticket to the Florence Fall Arts Gathering. No note, no return address. Just the name, Iris Campbell, exhibiting artist. I sent them tickets to the exhibit, not an invitation, just a gesture. Let them choose if they'd show up. I used to think I needed a name on a family tree to matter. But now I have something else, my name beneath a photo. October 7th arrived with a kind of quiet fanfare, sunlight that felt gentle, a breeze that carried the smell of cinnamon and sea salt, and a sky so clear it felt rehearsed. The Fall Arts Gathering was held in a renovated barn near the harbor, strings of soft lights looping from beam to beam, fold-out chairs arranged in thoughtful clusters. It was simple, imperfect, and utterly beautiful. I got there early, portfolio tucked beneath my arm, camera bag slung across my back. Evelyn insisted on walking with me, even though her knees protested the whole way. She wore a scarf in fall colors, amber, rust, and burnt orange, and carried a tin of lemon cookies for the table, even though no one had asked her to bring anything. "You don't walk into a gathering empty-handed," she said. Inside, the air buzzed with small talk and the clinking of paper cups. Local artists bustled around, adjusting displays, fixing tape, brushing lint off jackets. It wasn't a big city gallery, but it felt significant. It felt earned. My prints were mounted near a window that caught the afternoon light. There was the harbor in the mist, the porch with Tucker, the corner of Evelyn's kitchen table where the sun always pooled in a quiet square. Beside each was my name in clean serif font, Iris Campbell. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing at the edge of something, waiting to be invited in. "Your stuff's real," Alex said, appearing beside me with a paper cup of cider. "Don't try too hard, just see." I nodded, unsure what to say to something that kind. He pointed toward the harbor photo. "That one's my favorite." "Mine too." More people arrived. A few asked questions about lighting, about composition. One woman told me the porch photo reminded her of her grandmother's house in Astoria. Another said she liked how quiet everything felt, even in stillness. Then, just past 4 o'clock, Sophie walked in. She stood at the doorway for a moment, scanning the room, then spotted me and made her way over. She wore a navy coat too big for her and carried a small, worn backpack. She didn't say anything right away, just pulled me into a hug, one of those long, quiet ones that said everything. "They couldn't come," she said against my shoulder. Dylan made some excuse. Mom just didn't want to. I pulled back slightly, met her eyes. "You didn't have to come either." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." We walked the exhibit together, slowly. She lingered at the photo of the porch, smiled, and pointed to the note I'd scrawled underneath. "Where kindness lives, everything blooms." "That's about Evelyn, isn't it?" I nodded. "But also about here, and maybe about me." She reached into her coat pocket and handed me a small folded card. I opened it later. Inside, in Sophie's messy cursive, were 5 words. "You didn't leave, you arrived." The evening wound down. People filtered out, plates emptied, lights dimmed. Evelyn sat near the exit, chatting with Alec, her scarf falling loose around her shoulders. I stayed behind to help stack chairs and gather tape from the floor. Outside, the air had turned cool and the town lights shimmered off the water. I walked back slowly, alone, camera bouncing softly against my hip. Up in my room, I spread the remaining prints across the bed. One caught my eye, a photo I hadn't shown anyone. Taken on a whim, it captured the old family reunion banner from July, faded in the sun, slightly askew. In the background, blurry but still recognizable, was a young woman standing alone beside the buffet table, her face half turned, unreadable. I stared at it for a long time, then flipped it over and wrote 2 words on the back, "Still standing." I mailed a new photo titled "Roots and Wings" to the address of her old family home. No note, just the light. I didn't expect a quiet town to teach me how to take up space, or a porch cat to remind me I still had light to offer. But sometimes it's not the grand gestures, it's the quiet hands that help us carry what we didn't know we were holding. Kindness doesn't always announce itself, but it lingers, like the smell of fresh coffee in the morning or the sound of waves outside a window you once thought wasn't yours. When we stop trying to belong to people who can't see us, we start belonging to ourselves, and that's where healing begins. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps let it echo forward with a small kindness of your own.